Hello, we welcome you all to the continuing series Evenings with Sraddhalu. My name is Alina Sinovic, and together with Joel from Oroville, namaste Joel.
Namaste.
We will be the moderators for the Evenings with Sraddhalu weekly.
Namaste everybody, happy to be back with this series. And thank you, Alina and Joel and others who made special efforts to have us restart. Since we paused the recordings, the world has gone through a huge shift. And that period of the last 1 year has been not only for us a period of introspection, but also a period of radical awakening. Not just because of the pandemic, but because of the way the pandemic is being handled across the world, consistently, across platforms, across the media, across political, economic, and other interests, is enough to make the common human realize that something is seriously wrong. We can't always pinpoint what's wrong, but it's obvious something is wrong. It's not how things should be. It's not, the responses don't appear to be reasonable. There are extremes of panic, fear, compulsions, reduction of freedoms, increasing domination of power structures, preventing us not only from living a normal life economically just for survival, but even a life which would have some creative or spiritual possibility. All these are being crushed out. Instead, the means used as if to combat a pandemic are so unconnected and sometimes even contrary to what would be needed from a medical perspective. People are being asked to stay locked up at home outside the sunlight, when in fact it is in fresh air and sunlight that you would be most free from the danger of any kind of infection, logically. The latest research, actually it's old research when the pandemic started, the first research indicated that within 2 minutes, the coronavirus is eliminated in sunlight. What would be the logical thing to do if you want to be free of it? Step out of the house, breathe fresh air, and that's when you're most likely not to get infected, isn't it? We were told that you had to put on a mask because the spit particles are thrown out when you speak, and they will transmit the virus. But in fact, afterwards you're told the mask is supposed to stop the virus. And if you put a double mask, you're more likely to be free of the virus. And if you put a triple mask, then you will be even more free. All of which is completely false scientifically. All you're doing is reducing the quantity of oxygen going into you. And I would point out that in the last 1 year, it's more than a year, it's 1.5 years now, think of the children who were born after the pandemic began. When parents sitting at home have been advised to wear masks at home, the babies see their mother and father with barely the eyes seen. Babies themselves are sometimes being made to wear masks. Think about how illogical and irrational it is. Because first of all, it was common sense, but you also have research showing you that if you're in the same room or in the same house for more than a few minutes, whether you may wear a mask or not, the exchange of air, old air, stale air, or just common air, is going to bring in everything. And it does not matter if you keep 6 feet distance or 60 feet distance or 0 feet distance. Those things make sense only when you're in a public space where you might be passing by somebody or having a short conversation of 2 or 3 minutes. If you're at home or in an office space, it does not matter whether you keep 0 meters or 60 meters. So why this insistence on a 6 feet distance and masking at home or in office spaces? It's unscientific, illogical. It has only one agenda, which is to somehow suffocate humanity. And all of these are not deliberately, consciously thought out or known by the common people because the information never comes to you through the media. which is only busy telling you how many people are infected, numbers rising, when they don't tell you that 99% of the infected have no symptoms at all or have only mild symptoms. And it passes. More light than a normal flu. Yes, there are those who have an extreme, but they are less than 5% of the infected. And they are largely people of a much older age or people who had already other illnesses, which the virus infection somehow weakens the body to a point where those illnesses overwhelm the system. And there is only one message drilled in with all the fear: get vaccinated, get vaccinated. Without telling you that none of these vaccines have been tested on human beings in the normal vaccination protocols. They're all put out under an emergency authorization use. All of them have been shown to have side effects because of the very nature of the coronavirus, which is a derivative of the flu virus, for which to date nobody has ever been able to make a vaccine. And for a very simple reason, that the coronavirus mutates so rapidly that any vaccine you create will remain effective only for a few months. And this is normal. Coronavirus is not the COVID-19 SARS-CoV virus. It is the normal flu virus. And so if you go, for example, the only place I have seen this in the world and nowhere else is in the United States, where they have something called seasonal flu shots. So the vaccine companies, well, they have to keep making money. So there are people sitting at airports and you pay some $5 or $10. They give you what is the equivalent of a vaccine, whose effect lasts for 2 or 3 months during the flu season. But it does not guarantee that you won't get the flu. So what's the point of it? Well, it just feeds the pharma company, that's all. The only reason why they've never been able to make a vaccine for the flu is it mutates too fast. And the COVID virus, SARS-CoV-2, technical name, equally mutates as fast. Its only distinction from the normal flu is it has some very specific characteristics, which now we are told were actually engineered possibly. And these characteristics are optimized to bind to the human being, to bind to different parts, different tissues in the human body. And that's the reason why it is so virulent, optimized for the virulence. But also it is the reason why when a few people get those infections, they also have stronger symptoms, and it's harder to get the body free of it. But eventually you do. The bulk of the people. If you see the graph of age-wise deaths, up to the age of, let's say, 65 or 70, and this is purely from statistics of people who fell sick and died from COVID or died from COVID, up to age of 65, your chances of dying from the COVID virus is less than the chance of getting a car accident. But after 65, it starts rising. After 70, it rises more. After 80, it rises dramatically. What is interesting is your vaccines were tested with just clinical testing, not following the normal protocol of vaccine testing, which takes 5 years minimum. They were tested for clinical purpose of just a few months on young people only who didn't need it. You could have given them saline injections and they would have been as effective because they were automatically immune. The number of people above 70 who were tested for the vaccine is barely 4% in the whole vaccine clinical testing. And straight away you realize something very strange there. The media never tells you these things. In fact, I wrote a short note, I wrote a detailed note on this whole thing. And while doing the research for this note, I went in depth on the vaccine testing protocols and found out all these things. And I couldn't find it anywhere in the internet. Nobody really raises these issues. And yet every human being senses something is not all right. Because inherently, we are not just biology and psychology and mind. We are first and foremost spiritual beings. Our entire frame of existence is predominated by the spiritual content of who we are. We are spiritual beings who have a mind, who have life energies, and who have a body. And therefore, although we may have forgotten or we may be insensitive or unconscious to these higher parts or deeper parts of us, those parts exist. They are active all the time. They are far more active than your surface thinking and feeling and actions. In fact, if you had to, when the inner consciousness first awakes, when our subliminal begins to open up, we realize that which is subliminal to us is 99% of who we are, at least. And all this, which we are so normally preoccupied with, is a tiny part. And so in that 99% of our consciousness, which is superconscious to us, we already know. We know all these things. We know what's happening. We know something is wrong. We know where it's heading. We know the mischief that is being done. But from there to here, the surface, there's such a gap. Things leak out. Suggestions leak out. You feel strange. You find it odd. But here, you say, I don't know. Here, you believe. You're taught. You're programmed by repeated messages that come through the media to create fear. And so it is necessary for all of us to take a step back. Make an effort in your life. Stop watching television. Stop reading the newspaper. And I recommend doing this for 3 days, because it takes about 3 days for the hypnosis of that media to fade away. Do this for 3 days. And then after that, look at all these headlines. Look at the newspaper of the last 3 days. Look at the headlines which are still flowing. Oh, nothing has changed. 3 days ago, they were saying the same thing. Nothing has changed. And it will give you a distance and objectivity, a witness poise, so to say, however partial, in which you'll begin to recognize that this is a superficial, transient, perhaps even entirely erroneous information. But go through this exercise if you really want to wake up from the illusion that's being created. So the question Robert asked, which was not before the pandemic, where he asks is, how would people wake up and see that something is wrong? There was also another question from Apurva about this uniformity which is being imposed through this. We use the word deep state in those discussions. And there's an agenda of the interested parties. You know, the deep state is a term which is generally ridiculed in the media because it serves their interests, because the media is largely also formed of the deep state. So let me explain what the deep state is. The deep state is interests who have been entrenched, sitting in power structures for decades sometimes, none of whom are elected, all of whom are sitting in cozy positions knowing they can never be dislodged. For example, bureaucrats, heads of industry, people in any power structure involving any activity where they are seated at a position where nobody can topple them. Or even if there is some appearance of democratic structure or election, they are such that nobody would ever remove them. As you can see, often happens in the political space, certain people just keep getting elected for decades. Even though people are fed up with it, somehow the politicians find their way back. Or when they are too old, their children take over and replace them. With what competence? None. And you realize there is some mechanism by which they're able to handle things and ensure their continuity. But just coming back to bureaucrats. The bureaucrats in any country across the world, and then there's one more, which is the most powerful, the most secret, the least seen intelligence agencies around the world. In their very formation, they are meant to be hidden. They're given enormous amount of funds with no accountability. What they do with it, you will never know. You cannot know. Even the elected representatives who come and go, who assign those funds, cannot know. Isn't that strange? So where is oversight for intelligence agencies? None. What happens when an intelligence agency decides that they're going to control what happens in the country? They're going to choose who gets elected or not. They insert their operatives inside the media. Look at the United States. And I'm going to take this as an example because it's the most visible and the most dramatic example of how the deep state works. The entire media in the United States, more than 200 outlets, are all owned by 5 companies. These 5 companies produce all the military arms, bombs, missiles, planes, and the works, where a single plane might be $1 billion or multi-billion, 20 billion or $100 billion. And all the big media companies, and you can take the big names of television, for example, I won't even name them. All of them have programs with names of individuals. So they'll say the so-and-so show. I won't take names. The bulk of these people who are the presenters in a show are all former CIA, former FBI. And they say it openly. That's their biodata. They come with a background of having been a CIA operative, and now they are in the media. The bulk of the people who are in the presidential advisory boards are married to heads of media companies or are former CIA operatives or FBI operatives or whatever, security agencies. Now you can see what happens there. When the entire media narrative is driven by people who were part of a security agency which had been running wars, funded now by companies which want wars to continue because that's how they earn their profits, you can see there is a very closed circle that forms. Politicians, bureaucrats, media, and business companies. They all join together with a common interest to protect their interest, to perpetuate their control, and to ensure nobody who questions that power structure is allowed to come in. That's your deep state. Now, why is it more powerful? Because your elected representatives may pass a few bills in parliament or in the Senate or the House or whatever form the government is. For every bill that is passed by your elected representatives, there are about 200, what's the right word? Orders, I missed the right word. The governmental orders which are passed by the bureaucrats, which may have no correspondence with what your elected representative or what you would want. They're entirely designed to perpetuate their structures. So 1 to 200, that's the power structure relationship. If your elected representative can get a bill passed after a lot of struggle of months and a lot of lobbying, those bureaucrats can pass 200 bills at the same time with no power struggle, no lobbying. They have the power, they just do it, they have no accountability. That's your deep state. It's not such a big deal. But recognize that everything that's happening is decided by those people and not by elected representatives. Or even when the elected representatives try something, those people can bypass or ensure it fails, which is what we see often in India. An effort is made with all the good intentions. By the time it passes through the bureaucratic machinery, what comes out is a warped and distorted, meaningless, ineffective outcome. So the question really is, when will people wake up? And a year and a half ago, before the pandemic, we would have said it's going to take time. My hope is that now, with the last 1.5 years, and after the initial phase where we believed what the media told us and what the power structures told us, We've reached a point where people are questioning, people are doubting, people are wondering because things just don't fit. Something is wrong. And this is the point where I can say, yes, there's a chance that people might wake up if they stop believing the media power structures of the deep state, if they start thinking for themselves. And that's a big deal, in fact, because the mass of humanity, the bulk of our educational system is designed not to make us think, it's designed to train us to behave. It's training and not educating. There's a very big difference between the two. And I'm going to go out on a limb when I say all the doctors out there who have been treating cases of COVID infections, 99% of them are not thinking doctors. They're trained doctors and well-trained, trained for working within certain fixed frameworks of sicknesses and protocols to follow for those sicknesses. And it works wonderfully. But the moment you come to a sickness which does not have a protocol, as in the case of the COVID, but the only thing the global agencies like the WHO and others have been saying are, don't use HCQ, don't use ivermectin, because there's no evidence that it works. That's all they have told you. They've never told you, use this, do that. This is how you protect yourself, other than put on masks and social distance and lock up at home. And now get vaccine. Other than that, nothing else. There has been no treatment protocol offered by anybody. No global body, no national body, no local body is giving you a treatment protocol. If you say you have an illness, they say stay at home. If it gets bad, when it gets really bad, you go to the hospital. That's not a treatment protocol. What do you do in the hospital? They give you oxygen, they give you certain steroids, or they give you palliatives for you to survive through, but there's no treatment. Ask yourself why. Any illness which would appear newly, and this is not really a new illness, it is SARS-CoV-2, variant of the SARS-CoV-1, which took place 18 years ago, for which treatment protocols had been developed, in fact, by the way, which were all removed, ignored during SARS-CoV-2. Why? Why is it that even after, okay, let's say after it starts, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months down, treatment protocols should have been tried? There were people, in fact, who were treating and with success, who were shut out by the media, videos deleted. So I have to be very careful what we say here, otherwise the entire channel will be deleted with no chance of no discussion. And it's happened to all these. Why is it that after 6 months, no effort is made to create a treatment? And we have to think. But we don't think because we're not used to thinking. And so I'm going quite far out on a limb when I say 99% of the doctors don't think. They've just been seeing news reports and applying what they heard. Calling up a colleague in another city, what are you trying? Oh, we are trying this, let's try this also. That's it. Something works, something doesn't. Oh, by the way, this medicine worked with that person, that medicine worked with another. And for the third patient, I give both, in case one of them works. And for hospitals, very strangely, and I'm saying this from real, actual inside information. For hospital management, it was a bonanza, huge profitability. In Pondicherry, for example, we were seeing on the newspapers numbers, 500 infected, 1,000 infected, 2,000 infected, numbers climbing. We call up a health official in the government. What's really happening? He says, no, it's nothing. We are taking in 30 people because they have tested positive. Most of them have no symptoms. And at the same time, we are putting out 29 people. In other words, barely 3% of people are actually going to hospital or have a problem which needs hospitalization or even some special Medicare. All the others were sent in because they were told they are positive. I give an example of a person who was to fly. This is in Mumbai. Because he's flying, he takes a test. And the test comes out positive. Nothing in his symptoms. And because he's positive, the entire family of 30 people is tested. All of them are found to be positive. How long have they been positive? We don't know, perhaps for months. No symptoms at all. They're all put under quarantine for 14 days. After that, if you test them again, they're still positive. But they're asked to go out, get on with your life. You don't need to do anything because you were quarantined 14 days. Does it make logical sense? It doesn't, right? And yet the question is not being asked. Or who made that story? Who made that rule that after quarantining 14 days, we don't need to test you? Even if you're positive, it doesn't matter. So something is seriously wrong. And all of us sense it in our subliminal parts. The problem is we don't know here, and we don't know how to respond. We don't know what to do. But if we don't start thinking, if we don't start questioning, if we don't start looking behind the scenes, digging through the appearances to get to the real facts, well, we will just remain sheep to the deep state control structures. So we're at a very interesting point where it's either wake up or lose your right to be free because you don't deserve it. Think about it this way. From the position of the entrenched interests of the deep state, and I'm using the deep state in a very general word. I'm not saying that, yes, there are people who are actually deliberately, intentionally pushing an agenda. That's a different group, which we refer to as the cabal. But the deep state is just entrenched interests. The hospitals, which want to see their profits shoot, they want to have you come through positive. It serves their interest. Deep state interests, they care only for their power, position, wealth, not for the sheep who are to be treated as what they deserve. So the question really is, what do we deserve? And that's the choice we will make. We had a long discussion on this theme earlier, where we spoke of what Sri Aurobindo had described, going back 100 years. He used the term, the world state, to describe the coming together of these power interests. It's fascinating, you have to study Sri Aurobindo, you have to read in detail, because that's the only way you will really understand what happens. But sometimes people find it difficult because there's so much, it's so rich and so layered. But he explains how, describing structures of power in different countries, that when a country finds a power structure suffocating the people, either the people overthrow or nature steps in by bringing another power structure from outside, which breaks this. So we had, for example, in India, we had the colonial rule which came in. Before that, we had the invasions which came from the Middle East to break something which had got entrenched. But what happens when, and especially in the phase we are at, all the countries of the world join up into increasingly unified, integrated humanity? So we are already integrated in financial means. You can transfer money from your mobile phone, transfer money to anywhere in the world. We're integrated in communication of information through these broadcasts, through internet. We are integrated in education. We can sit anywhere in the world and attend any class from anywhere. Knowledge is available more freely. We are integrated in other ways, economically and politically also. But with this integration comes the integration also of the deep state power structures. At that point, when they join up across countries, let's say the rogue elements in your intelligence agencies now link up across, you would not know because they won't tell you. When they start exchanging favors to perpetuate their interests, what happens? The entire world now is wrapped up in a bubble that is progressively squeezing people. Shrinking, squeezing bubbles that compel you, as you can see in the last 1 year, to live in your own single room at home. What you had earlier, the freedom to travel all over the world, has been shrunk. And it's done by intention. It's also inevitable in the way this integration takes place. And so Sri Aurobindo describes this, and that's when he says the dangers of the world state. But what is most interesting, when he's describing this, he says, the first interest of the world state will be to take away individual freedom. Because if you're allowed to think for yourself, he says, to take away the freedom of speech. The first interest of the deep state will be, of the world state will be to take away freedom of speech. Why? Because if you're allowed to speak, which is actually thinking for yourself freely, you can start questioning what the world state is trying to do. You can start questioning its double standards. And it will never tolerate that. It is intolerant. He uses words which are far more harsh. I wish I had the memory to be able to quote just like that. But it is intolerant of freedom of thought. It fears freedom of thought. And look at what's happening. The way in which people are being censored across the board. When doctors come up with protocols which could treat you for COVID, and successfully, there's one doctor in South Africa, Dr. Shankara Chetty, look him up, comes up with the protocol for treating. He has treated 4,000 patients, 100% cure from COVID, 0 deaths, 0 hospitalizations, 0 need for oxygen. And there are others. But when a group of doctors in America came up, they called themselves America's frontline doctors. They came up with a media presentation saying, we are doing this with 100% results. We can stop the pandemic with this. The media which was present countered them by saying, but so-and-so Dr. F, who is head of some bureaucratic institution, says that this is not possible. And they said, when did this doctor ever treat a patient? He's a head of an institution as a bureaucrat. He's never been a doctor that treated patients. They gave all the evidence. The media recorded all this, went back and suppressed. Nothing, not a squeak. In fact, the videos they had uploaded had millions of views until it was removed by YouTube. Why is it removed? By who? Not medical personnel. The joke is, Facebook, for example, to decide which messages are allowed to stay or be removed, they have a board which they call the Supreme Court. Think about what that means. It's a parody. It's a caricature of the term Supreme Court. You see, till now, Supreme Court for us represented the epitome of justice, the final resort of the highest standard of justice. It's replaced by a group of selected people. They're called the Supreme Court, and all they do is edit anything which might represent a thought process that the deep state fears or the world state is afraid of. And that's called a Supreme Court. You see the way terms are being abused and turned into meaningless terms. Once you start using this vocabulary, this is my Supreme Court, that's your Supreme Court, there's no meaning left, no sanctity left to what was earlier something so valuable, represented something so important for a nation's identity even. And all this is happening so rapidly. This is the other interesting element. Had this been drawn out over 10 years, we would not have noticed it. Had it been extended over 2 generations, we would not notice it. And I'm going to remind you of something I mentioned before. Go back perhaps 40 years now. A single parent working could look after a family of 5 or 6 people. The father, typically that was the format in those days, the father worked, earned enough, the mother looked after home and children, and there were 2 or 3 or more children. But one person could earn enough to give everybody a comfortable life. Today, with both parents working, you still don't have enough money for a good education for one child. When did the transition take place? Well, you don't know. You don't even notice. And the generation born in the last 20 years or 30 years have no idea that the other thing was possible. So that change was done so slowly that people didn't realize, and we were all squeezed to a point where we became just slaves, drones, struggling to survive, keeping on running to stay on the same spot and losing. But when the whole shift takes place in 1 year, it hits you. You can see what happened, what was a year ago and what is now. So it's a wake-up call. So I come back to this observation. This last 1 year has been not only a period of introspection, it's also been a year of waking up. And if we have not taken the effort to think, to observe, to analyze, to look behind the scenes, then perhaps we don't deserve the freedom that we had been gifted, or we deserve to have it taken away. And yet we feel it. We know somewhere in our subliminal something is wrong. And if we learn to value that, if the introspection that you went through has led to some deeper awakening, wake up. This is your time. What can you do? No, I don't have a simple answer for that. But at least as a first step, educate yourself on what's happening. Start thinking. Break out of this training of your mind to not think, to follow blindly. Wake up and start thinking. How? Well, that has to be a different discussion. So I'm looking at the questions which were there, the first two questions of Robert and others. And all this we put in the context of the way the pandemic has been. And we have to start looking at the big picture. Read Sri Aurobindo as he describes this whole development of the world state. Read what he describes as the issues which come up. What are the perils of the world state? There's a whole chapter called The Perils of the World State. The chapter before and after, you should read all of them. Read. Even if you find portions that you don't fully understand, just keep on reading. Get the overall drift of what he presents. And there's a very suggestive passage, very suggestive, where he says something like, if it happens for a while that the world state actually manages to squeeze, I'm using my own words, manages to squeeze and take away the freedom of the people. If that is intended, it could be because it's useful for us to get familiar or know what it's like to be part of a global human experience. And so he actually suggests that's going to happen, but he says it'll be extremely unhealthy for the human being and of course, for our spiritual possibilities. And yet it may be a passage we might have to go through. And it will, of course, provoke revolts. And all these he gives you as suggestions that this is likely to happen. And we are in it now. What is the form of the revolt? I don't know. But if we are not aware, we will not be able to take steps to win back our freedom. This is a very true statement made by former US President Ronald Reagan. He says, freedom can be lost in one generation. He says I don't have the exact words, but it only takes one generation to lose the freedom. And then you never get it back. Wake up and start taking steps. So this, I think, is a broad frame which I want to start with as a base for further discussion and perhaps some of the further questions which are also there.
There's Sraddhalu, there's a lot of questions now on this topic on vaccination. There's more than 4 people who are having some questions how this vaccination will create obstacles or a blockage in receiving the force of the supramental force which Mother worked in her physical consciousness in the cellular mind.
Absolutely. So just I think among the last sessions we had with this evening series was on the theme of the vaccine. We recorded it in February when the first signs of the pandemic were already in place. We had 2 sessions. I would suggest for all of you to take a look at that if you have not seen it already. But important thing which we can draw from there, first, what the mother explained about the nature of microbes generally, bacteria, viruses, they are physical material formations of something which is essentially a vital or subtle physical energy form. You see, our view of the world is too reductionist to matter only. So, for example, I look at a bird or a flower. What do we normally see? This one is, in our mind, it's a construct. Oh, this is a rose. That is a lotus. We are just looking at word lotus or idea of lotus, not that lotus. That lotus is so special. It was never existent before in the whole of history of the universe. This is unique. Look at it. Okay. But what we are not seeing in that, of course, we may still appreciate and say, this is so beautiful. What we are not seeing is the life energy, which is thriving inside it. When we look at a human being, you see the appearance, you see the eyes, and perhaps in the eyes and in the body language, you sense what the person is thinking or feeling. The person is unhappy, or the person is lost in thought, or this person is coming with some very great positive news. You sense it when you look at the person, right? But we will say, I saw it from the body language. But it's not body language. You're sensing on a deeper level. Now, all of us have had this experience. Let's say you're sitting at work, concentrated. Someone comes into the room. You just hear a sound at best. But before you even turn to look, you sense the mood of the person. Oh my God, someone is very upset. Or you know who it is. How does that happen? Because you yourself have an energy body, which extends quite large. They have an energy body. As they enter the room, there's a contact at the level of energies, which is already transmitting not only information, it's transmitting energies, it's transmitting emotions and thoughts, all of which we are unconscious of. So the reality is, if you could see a human being, not just this physical body, but the subtle physical body, and then the subtler layers of the subtle body of the vital and the mental, and perhaps even the spiritual. You look at the flower and you would see all these layers, and you'd see, for the clairvoyants who see these things, they describe beautiful colors and complex interactions that take place between human beings. You walk into a room and there are parts of your consciousness which spread out and touch everybody in the room. Or things, energy streams from them that come and touch you, feel you, and either withdraw or connect. And there's a whole rich life that's taking place in these subtle worlds, which determine what happens in our physical life and physical behavior. Why am I explaining this? Because that's how you have to look at what the virus or the bacterium is. A virus is not just this crystalline structure of physical molecular arrangements. It is an energy bundle behind of which this is a crystallized point of contact in the physical world. It's like visualize an upside down iceberg. The larger body is in the energy, and the tiny point of support, in French we have a beautiful term, point d'appui, the point of support, point of pressure in the physical world is this thing which you hold. So you grab a virus or a bacteria, move it around. What you're doing is you're dragging this whole energy bundle with it. Now, when you put that into you, you're putting the energy bundle into you. So when you put in this virus inside you, you're putting in the energy which goes with it. So I'll give you another example of how this works. You know, some of these examples we might have already spoken of before. Perhaps, I don't know, but they're worth repeating because if I've forgotten, you might have forgotten also. There's an interesting example of a particular parasite. It's a kind of a worm that lives inside a cat, breeds inside the cat, passes out in the feces of the cat, and infects a mouse. When it gets inside the mouse, the parasite needs to get back to cat to be able to replicate. So in the mouse, this worm releases, so from a physical point of view, it releases chemicals that influence the mouse behavior, nervous system and brain. Now, it's not chemicals. The chemicals are the physical point of support of the energy. So the parasite is putting out an energy that is infecting the aura of the mouse and shaping its emotions and thoughts from inside out. Now imagine what that does. A physical parasite is only a point of support. What it does to you is psychological first and foremost. It changes the way you behave. Okay, so it makes the mouse override, or it overrides the mouse's instinct. The mouse has an instinct to run away from the cat. Now, this mouse experiences an instinctive shift that it feels attracted to a cat. Whose attraction is it? Not the mouse. It's the parasite energy bundle attracted to the cat, which is now infecting the mouse behavior and compelling its energy onto the mouse behavior, bypassing its freedom. The mouse thinks, I'm attracted to a cat. Now, in the laboratory, we find the behavior of the mouse in its attraction is almost like a sexual attraction. Why? What is the thing linked there? Is because the nature of the attraction is a compelling drive of a very compelling vital push that compels the mouse against its own will, blocking out all its natural instinct of nature programming going back millions of years, to make the mouse approach a cat and the cat eat the mouse, so that the parasite can now transfer into the cat to start replicating again. This example sounds dramatic. It's what happens everywhere in all parasital processes. When you have, for example, two species which are friends, it's at an energy level that they are friends first. When two species are enemies, it is at an energy level that they are enemies first. So the entire physical behavior of the animal and plant kingdom is a reflection of the vital world behavior of their primary prototypes, species prototypes. So it's actually possible that on that level, you make friendship with a species king. So for example, the king of the snake approached the mother and said, let's make a deal. Because at that time, there was a problem in one of the ashram gardens in what was Nandanam, and the snakes were being attacked by the human beings. So the snake king came to the mother and said, let's make a deal that I will grant immunity to all your followers, that my species will never bite your followers. And the condition, of course, he said, was that you people shouldn't kill me. And mother could have said, yes, okay. And the result would have been a miraculous change, that all those who are following the mother would find that snakes have stopped biting them. It's as simple as that. It's so immediate as that. Well, mother didn't take the offer. She said, well, I can't guarantee that they won't kill you. If there is any danger, they might. So the deal was not made. But this is how these things work in the occult planes. So all this is to explain that behind COVID is a certain energy construct, the being, which represents this virulent perversion that the COVID virus is a point of support for in the physical world. So when you take in the virus, or a variant of it, or a partial part of it, which is what the vaccine carries, you're taking into your body something of that energy, partially or fully, or in a weakened way. And the result is an infection of what? Of an energy, first and foremost. Even if your physical biology is able to counter the virus, and maybe after that you have an immunity, the energy, once having entered into you, is going to work. More serious though, you see, there are three technologies. Perhaps those of you who are interested should look at this note that I have prepared. I discussed this in great detail. There are three technologies involved. The most common, which is the one which we see in India as Covaxin, is made from a deadened virus of the COVID, which is relatively least harmful. But the other two, which are the new technologies, which is a viral vector and the mRNA technologies, they actually take a portion of the COVID virus, DNA, RNA, insert it into you in a manner that your cells become a hybrid. See, your cells are mutated by an infection of the COVID virus so that you have a COVID human hybrid cell. So you have a human cell now which develops the COVID spikes and other forms of the COVID consciousness, and which replicate and spread in your body. And your body now begins to attack this as a foreign infection, and in the process develops an immunity. This is the rationale of those two types of vaccine. It is, from a spiritual point of view, it is perverse. It is like saying, to make you strong against an asuric energy, we will infect you with the asuric tendency so that you may acquire an asuric tendency, so that you may fight it and defeat it, and therefore be now immune to a greater force of that asuric energy. No, it doesn't work that way. Once you infect yourself with falsehood, with a perversion, you never get free of it. And this is the reality also in such means. When you deliberately infect with a fragment or a whole of the COVID, it never really goes away. This is the problem of all genetic interventions. There are many genetic interventions used for curing illnesses, where certain gene strands are placed to change the body's genes in order to be free of an illness. The problem with those things is once inserted, it's done. It's for good. You cannot get it out. You can insert a gene into your body. You cannot take out a gene from your body. You can insert a virus and infect your body. You cannot take it out ever again. You may say the body has now become immune, but what is immunity? The virus can never cause now a full-fledged infection. That's all. But it can continue to live inside you, as happens, for example, with the herpes virus. All you need to do is have a physical contact on skin with somebody who has a herpes virus infection on the skin. It transfers into your skin, enters into your body, lives inside the nervous system in a way that the body can never remove it. That's it for life. Oh, you may cause it to deactivate, but the first chance it gets, it will reactivate. And one of the key triggers is stress. And the same would happen with all the things we may take in through the virus. So this is, from a spiritual point of view, it is extremely harmful to the body consciousness and the cellular consciousness, which nature has taken millennia to try to make conscious, even to make intuitionalized, and to open to a spiritual possibility. And it's the reason why one has to be extremely careful of any such decision. For people who don't have that as a spiritual ideal, I don't know. I would still say you're damaging the purity of the human genome, which nature has struggled to build. Maybe nature will find a way eventually even to use this as a way of enriching her possibilities, like the nuclear bombs to which Mother made the similar comment. She said, nature has taken billions of years to bring stability into an atomic structure. Through this fission, where you break an atom, you are reversing nature's effort. And that has a ripple effect across the universe in the very nature of the atoms. Because you must understand, what we call laws of physics are only habits of nature. They repeat because they are bound habits developed over billions of years. You reverse the habit, you are weakening the habit in the universe. And so she said it was extremely harmful. And then she made a comment that perhaps if the supramental uses this, it can make for a more rich possibility in matter. You know, it's a way of looking at it positively. You might say the same thing for the human body. If it is damaged in certain ways, well, it might be used to make for richer possibilities, but that should not be something we do by choice. Damage done by choice is, well, damage. So this is something we have all to be very careful about. I will not say what you should do. If to you this makes sense and it's obvious what you should do, then you follow what you know to be best. But if it doesn't make sense, then perhaps it doesn't matter for you. So finally, it comes back to what is our priority. If the fear in you is greater than your trust in your own body's strength and immunity or in the divine protection, well, you may make choices based on that fear. But know that these are not casual choices. You see, based on fear, I might wrap cloth around my head, and I still see people wearing goggles, dark glasses, and covering their body while walking in the sun, just because they think the virus is going to invade if they remove the cloth. It's the opposite, in fact. The more you cover your face with mask, the more you breed bacteria inside. And that's what creates illnesses. The more you breathe fresh, dry air, the more it clears out those bacteria. But if you can do that, at worst, you may have a little bit of a flu or fall ill for a while. But once you insert something in the genetic structure, it's irreversible. The damage will be for life. So one has to be very careful about these decisions.
We have one comment from Bashkar. He says, I'm worrying about this. How could we handle if someone forces directly or indirectly in terms of vaccine certification, for example, in entering in a country or going to work?
Yes.
And his comment is that this is a violation of human rights, which definitely is.
Absolutely. There are many legal angles to this whole question, and one has to really go in. I perhaps am not the best person to comment on this, but you will find a lot of literature on the internet. There are certain agencies which are bringing forward this information. One of the things which was done after the Second World War, it's part of what is called the Nuremberg Protocol, is that it was agreed that to impose an medical experiment on human beings is a violation of our fundamental right. And this is what is being done now, because these vaccines are not authorized by the conventional protocols. They are under emergency authorization put out as experimental vaccines. If you look at the website of the authorization by the government, it says that this particular vaccine is not linked to meant for treatment of any particular symptoms. Can you believe that? The vaccine is not meant for treatment of any symptoms, but it can be used under emergency protocol for treating COVID infections. What does it mean? It means we don't even know the safety of the vaccine. We don't know even whether it works. It seems to work, but like I said, the data itself is flawed because the tests were done in a flawed way. So we are at a time where some kind of collective action will be necessary. What form it will take or needs to take, I can't say. But there are groups which are organizing themselves as NGOs. And some of these I have listed in the note which have been circulating. In India, in the United States, there's a group that calls itself the America's Frontline Doctors. And they have been doing something legally also. In India, there's one group, I don't know, Joel, do you remember the name?
Awakened India Movement.
Okay. So you can look up some of these and educate yourself. But what it'll require, if in your workspace you find your hiring company is imposing this on everybody, if you're alone, there's not much you can do. But if all of you group together and say, no, this is going to be harmful, and we want to explore alternatives, the company can do nothing. They can't fire all of you. They can fire one person, but they can't fire 80% of you. So some kind of collective action will be required if we are to protect ourselves. And if you see what's happening also from the perspective of the deep state, world state, elite groups, they're also scared of a revolt. Understand? They appear to be all powerful, but at the end of the day, the power they have is the power you give to them. Because you sit silent, because you obey, they have the power. If all of us stood up and say, no, we will not accept this, that's the greatest thing they fear. That's why they have to control the public discourse. They have to stifle free and open voices who might provoke others to start thinking. You see, that's the problem of the world state. It has to stop free speech and free thought in order to survive. But on the other side, this is what we need most today. They cannot impose something which we refuse as a whole.
There's another question from V. Patel. With all major countries pushing a mass vaccine rollout, us, the only way to the pandemic, as they say, no? How do vaccines, as a principle of healing, would align to Sri Aurobindo's teachings? And if vaccines should be taken?
So there's a very good precedent. And looking back, I'm grateful that precedent took place. This was during the time when Pondicherry was still under French rule. Vaccines had just become fashionable. And there was a point when the French government wanted to vaccinate everybody. So they came across saying, okay, in the ashram, you have, I don't know, 400 people or whatever it was at that time. We want to vaccinate everybody. And so Sri Aurobindo makes a comment, and Nirodharan documents this in his, of course, it's documented in his correspondence, but also in his book subsequently, that Sri Aurobindo referred to vaccination as this dark principle. And so Nirodharan said, but it works. He said, however effective it may seem, but it is a dark principle. And he insisted that the ashramites should not be vaccinated. He gave reasons, which unfortunately Nirodha has not documented in detail, but he gave reasons. And then what they suggested, the way Sri Aurobindo worked it out, a few of the hired workers in the ashram were sent to the French government to satisfy the government instinct to have vaccinated people. And a few individuals from the ashram who were selected, Sri Aurobindo humorously referred to them as willing to be sacrificed on the altar of science. They were sent for the vaccination. I suppose they were the most hardy, the most physically, perhaps even insensitive, who could take the brunt of that without any significant thing. But all the rest were prevented or protected from being vaccinated. This is very important. And we have to see the context, of course. Here is a space where all the spiritual energies from the highest are being directed to the physical body, including, of course, mind, life, but also body, in order to help the body consciousness become spiritualized. And this is the most important thing in the whole world for the future of humanity. It's not a casual experiment. Oh, let's see what happens. It is the experiment necessary for the future of humanity, for the new evolutionary direction and awakening that has to take place. The new supramental being that has to emerge and evolve out of this model of humanity. And so what is being done has to be protected, first and foremost. Protect. At that time, though, the vaccine which were given were whole virus vaccines, which are where the virus is dead and then injected. What is being put today is not that. You see, the whole virus vaccine going into your body will not create a mutation. What is being given today, which is not a whole virus vaccine, is infection of your cells by the genome of the COVID at a genetic level to cause a human COVID hybrid. That's a genetic change. The most perverse, if you think from this point of view. But still the question would be, what's your priority? If for you the fear and the submission to the media narrative is more compelling than this other side, well, perhaps that's for you the right thing to do. Or even if you regret in future, that's all you could do. If you feel that this other side of the spiritual potential of your body is more important, then you have to take steps in that direction. Those steps will have two sides. One is, of course, you protect first. But second, you strengthen. Build the immunity of your body. Make it stronger. Open it also to a spiritual protection and action and help. Because there is nothing that the spiritual power cannot do more effectively than a biological, physical machinery can do. So, setting aside the damage that could come from a genetic intervention. So, protecting your body and strengthening it. What are the means immediately available? We know that being low in nutrition of vitamin B12, D3, etc., can reduce your immunity. So strengthen your immunity with good nutrition, with supplements if needed. Second, exercise. The vital energies of your body become stronger, more sturdy, more free-flowing, less stagnated when there is this churning of energy that takes place through certain forms of exercise, especially aerobic exercise, which is the source of the vitality and the fresh prana, the most fresh prana from the sun. Second, from living plants and trees. Of course, through the food, which comes from the fresh foods. So draw upon the fresh prana. Open yourself, embrace the sunlight. Not in fear, not like this, but like that. Here I am. Fill me with your fresh energy. Of course, so you don't allow yourself to get sunburned. The idea is not to stay for hours in the sun, but to open energetically to the flow of the fresh prana. And third, we have the technology taught to us through asanas and pranayam for strengthening the body, health, immunity, and life force. Use these means. They form a very solid base. But after all this, you have the most direct means, which is to open to the action of the divine energy. The way you open to the sun, if you can do this, you can also directly open to the mother's force, the mother's power, the mother's love, strength, protection, just as to the knowledge that she can give you also. But for that, you must value this, you must consider this more important than the other. It does not mean you will ignore the other. There are people who are foolish enough to say that I will not take allopathic medicine or any medicine because, no, it doesn't work like that, because you are not entirely open to the mother's force. Large parts in us are subconscious. Even parts which revolt, refuse, they need to be fed on other levels. That's where the nutrition and exercise will come in. But if you have done all those things, then the parts of you most open to the mother can now receive. And then through those parts, the energy will go through to the most material. That's why I gave that in sequence. I didn't say start with that. Start with this and then open to the mother's force. And the result will be the most complete protection you can ever have, that no vaccine with all its dangers could ever give. But then you must consider this more important, and you must feel that this is what you want to do.
Thank you, Sraddhalu, for giving us an advice and some illumination on this topic.
And we had thought to first put a limit of 1 hour about, and of course, we are free to exceed depending on the interaction. So maybe this would be a good time to pause also, because the message is really what we choose to do in terms of our spiritual life. And the spiritual life is not cut off from the material. It's not an abstraction of a devotional and mental turn. It's all inclusive down to the most material. And this present physical challenge that is being given is a way to remind us of that. But again, I will say, educate yourself on the facts. Know that there is nothing to fear. The very simple treatments possible by which this infection can be dealt with easily with 100% recoveries. Look up the information, get in touch with somebody who can assist you in providing that kind of support. But take this as part of your larger spiritual purpose. It's not to be seen in separation, because you cannot solve this problem purely by physical means. You have to see it in terms of the larger evolutionary purpose, because it is an evolutionary crisis. The whole problem of the suffocation of world state on human freedom is part of an evolutionary crisis, isn't it? Our meeting like this online perhaps is one way in which a collective response, at least on a spiritual or psychological level, can be made. But eventually it must lead to a collective response also in a material organization, in a social organization. So that is something which is beyond the scope of our discussion here. But I think it's a good topic to end on.
Thank you very much, Sraddhalu. Thank you, Joel.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Namaste to everybody. And let's concentrate for a moment, all of us together, invoking the mother's help, guidance, and protection for ourselves individually and for all of humanity, that we may all wake up and move forward to fulfill our spiritual purpose for which we are born.